All right. We should be good now. So we're going over political parties today. So this is the second of the three linkage institutions that we need to cover for this unit. All right. So first, what do political parties do? Basically, political parties exist in order to win elections and govern, right? Theoretically, they're responsive to the needs of the citizens, and they provide an opportunity for us to like mobilize and vote and whatnot. It's a complex issue. We already went over interest groups first. No, we went over media first, didn't we?
Yeah.
Did we do media first? On Monday? Okay. Political parties and interest groups have some similarities, and so you'll see that next Tuesday or whatever day we do this again. So again, political parties, it's an organization, it's a group of people that seek to influence government through the election of individuals, meaning their party members are going to get elected and then they're going to dictate government policy or government actions. To say that the founders didn't envision the rise of parties, I don't know that that's 100% true. They definitely didn't envision the hyper-partisanship that we have today, where people are so obsessed with political parties. But I think our founders knew. I mean, Federalist 10, Madison says that he understands that factions are going to happen, and factions are just groups. So I think they did understand that we would join groups and that we would have groups. I don't think they understood how prevalent political parties would become, okay? So basically, parties are a linkage institution, right? That's what's right there in the middle. So we're the voters. We get to help pick which party we want, and then that party sends elected officials to government in order to govern. So the parties are that avenue to help us pick our governing body, our governors, right? Those people that govern us. Okay. Parties actually want to increase sort of participation, right? They actually actively seek to get more people involved because the more people they can sort of mobilize to get to vote for them, the better off they're going to be. And so parties have to be competitive, meaning they have to have like ideas and ideals that people would actually be responsive to in order to accomplish anything. Some criticisms of sort of modern parties. One, our modern parties, first of all, we're predominantly talking about the Republican and Democratic Party. There are third parties, and we'll get to third parties, but for the most part, when we talk parties, we're just talking Republicans and Democrats. The reality is that both of them are basically bought and paid for by like big business and wealthy people. They're very elite. You and I don't have a whole lot of like input or say or control over the political parties. Okay. They're still essential to democracy because they do help increase participation. They provide us some cues or ideas of who we want to vote for, or what sort of ideals we want. They do make it easier, and you'll understand this. So I know at least I've got at least one person that's going to vote here in November. Were you going to vote? So you're older. Okay. So the two of you, you'll understand, like when you go and vote, all of a sudden you're going to see like, who do you want to vote for railroad commissioner? And you're going to be like, I don't even know what that person does. Like, I don't know. Parties can help in that regard, because if you understand like basic party structures and what basically the parties believe, then you can be like, okay, I don't know what the Texas Land Commissioner does, but I know that I generally support Republican ideals, or I generally support Democratic ideals, so I'm going to vote for that party's candidate. All right. Parties basically form one of two ways. So internal mobilization is like the internal is basically the like the elites, the people that are a part of the party already. External mobilization is basically those that exist outside of the power structure, the government power structure. We're gonna really run through this real quickly because I don't care. This is history. It's really not government. You should understand that we have a two-party system. Our two-party system exists and has existed forever. When you go back and you look, the history of like what the two parties are at the time, I don't care about. I need you to understand this, which is why we have a two-party system. This is how we elect people. Okay. The manner in which we conduct our elections, the manner in which we elect people, the manner in which we have our representation leads to a two-party system. It's an inevitability. And we have this because we have what's called single-member districts or a district system, which is different than a proportional system, right? So in the United States, we live in Texas, right? We live in the 22nd district, the 22nd congressional district for Texas, right? We will all go and vote when we can vote. We will all go and vote, and we pick one candidate to represent our district. Okay, that's a winner-take-all election or a single-member district, sometimes referred to as either. Okay, that requires only a plurality of the vote, not a majority of the vote, which is sometimes referred to as first past the post. All right, so that's another term you can hear for that. What that means is that if in our district 20 different people run and the highest vote total is 20%, then that guy or gal with 20% of the vote becomes our representative, even though that means that 80% of the people are unhappy because they voted for somebody else. Do you get that concept? Yeah. We understand that conceptually. Wonderful. The proportional system is different. Instead of having single-member districts, you basically vote for a party, and then that party gets X percentage of the seats. So in England, for instance, right, in England, there are, let's say that just for the sake of argument, there's 10 parties, right, and each party gets 10% of the vote. Then each party also gets 10% of the seats in Parliament. That's not how we do things. And so how we do things leads to a two-party system because ultimately you end up voting for the person that you hate less. And if you don't believe that, just look at the last two presidential elections, like this one that we're currently in, right, which has like the second worst candidates in the history of candidates, only second to 2016, which had the worst two candidates in the history of candidates. That just means I think that Hillary Clinton is slightly worse than Joe Biden. Okay. What do parties do? Basically three things. They seek people to run for office, they try to mobilize voters, and then they try to accomplish their goals once they're in office, right? But all of this ultimately means that they try to win elections. Like that's their first concern. They've got to win elections. They've got to find people to run. They've got to get people to vote for them. And then once they do, then they're going to achieve their legislative goals. The idea here then is to recruit quality candidates. We do have candidate-centered elections, but the parties are still somewhat responsible for that. So you're looking for somebody that's a strong leader, that you know doesn't have too many skeletons in their closet, that you know sort of looks good enough to fundraise well off of, and whatnot. Some of the things that prevent people from running, one, costs. It's ridiculously expensive to run for Congress, even more expensive to run for president. Like that's why I will never run for Congress, honestly. If I if I had like the time and the money and the energy, I would definitely run for Congress because, stupid mosquitoes. Yeah, I would run for Congress. So, but yeah, so it's really expensive. You have to spend a whole bunch of time fundraising. And then we do have something called gerrymandered congressional districts that really make it to where people don't run. Sometimes people run like unopposed because there's no point. The primaries exist in order to nominate the candidates to run in a general election. Okay. For the most part, we use primaries. There are a couple of states that use caucuses, and caucuses are basically like just meetings where they select candidates rather than vote on candidates. So when we say select, like they're discussing amongst themselves and like it's more of a debate conversation style thing than like you individually going in and pulling a lever and voting and walking out, right? Caucusing actually requires like a significant time commitment, which is why a lot of states don't do it anymore. Once they have their candidate, they got to mobilize voters. A lot of the times parties will work with nonprofit organizations to do that. A lot of nonprofits try to get people to mobilize to vote. America has relatively low voter turnout. So we try to increase voter turnout all the time. Like social media and data and science are now utilized in order to try to figure out like who to target and what to say to them in order to get them mobilized. Elections have become very, very data driven. Now the data is not always accurate. Obviously in 2016, we thought Hillary was going to win and she didn't. So the data is not always accurate. But for the most part, electioneering and political science, like it thinks itself to be a science. It's trying to utilize the scientific method and data in order to manipulate things. And so that's that idea of micro targeting, right? You're looking at very, very specific subsets that you're trying to get to show up to support you. Party organization, you basically have a national, a state, and a local party, and that's their like structure. It has its own leadership, its own committees, all of that wonderful stuff. The national level, they have party conventions. Those conventions happen every 4 years where we officially nominate the candidate for president and vice president. That national convention is attended by delegates from each state and some of the territories as well. They nominate the candidate for president of the United States, and they draft the official platform. And the plat's just a vocab term you need to know. But the platform is basically everything that the party wishes to accomplish over the next 4 years. This is just a showing of how they're organized. It's sort of a hierarchical structure. But, and I actually like this infographic because there's a little gap there between them. They're not always connected. And what that means is that sometimes the national sort of party can have different plans or different desires than a local or a state organization. Fundraising, parties try to fundraise, but the reality is candidates do more fundraising now than parties do, and interest groups do. Oh, sorry, I looked up there. Interest groups do more fundraising than parties do as well. So the parties in some regards are less significant than what they used to be. So again, PACs are just political action committees. That's part of what interest groups are. And so they have become more prevalent in fundraising than what the party has. And local, state, and national committees and parties, again, there's that hierarchical structure. So you do have local parties that are working for the local candidates and local offices. So mayor, for instance, or like state representative, those are occurring at lower levels. The national party is not nearly as concerned about that. Party machines, this is a history issue, really. Parties used to be ridiculously strong, right? They had all sorts of avenues to utilize their strength. They provided people with jobs. They could do a whole lot of things, but ultimately we got away with that. We switched that significantly. In our government, the political parties now, the Republican and Democratic parties now, have some pretty significant variations amongst them, specifically in their platforms. Doesn't mean that doesn't mean that they can get all of those implemented, but there are some significant differences. And I would advise you to go and look at the Republican and Democratic Party platforms in order to fully understand those. The parties are constantly looking to increase support. So they're constantly looking to bring in new groups into what they call their sort of base. And so this is done through sort of the idea of policy entrepreneurs, where the party will identify a political problem and then put it on the agenda in order to try to get these people to come. A good example of this is after 2000, when the Democrats lost in 2000, and they were shocked by that loss as well. They basically went out and took a lot of the positions of the Green Party and Ralph Nader and put it into the Democratic platform in order to try to get like environmentalists to vote Democrat. Super partisanship. So in order for the government to function, in order for the government to work, both parties need to be involved, and so that's a complex issue because they don't really do work together. They don't work together anymore. And so one of the things that we see is like government shutdowns, in which non-essential employees are like sent home. So like if you're a park ranger, a federal park ranger, for instance, you go home and you don't work because our parties are incapable of creating a budget and working together to actually have government function. There are factions within political parties as well. So because we only have the two, really, they're large enough that there are some subdivisions within them. The Democratic Party is really the best example right now, because obviously we have Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is sort of a moderate, traditional Democrat. And then you have like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are like socialist, sort of environmentalists that are they have very, very different beliefs and ideals for the Democratic Party. But it's true of the Republican Party as well. In Congress, the political party that has the most seats, that's the majority of the party. They're the ones that basically set the agenda and do everything. We'll talk about this in more detail when we actually get to Congress. So I'm not that concerned about how parties function in Congress right now. Party identification, we've talked about this in the last unit, right? Identification is very, it's a self-identification, right? You can declare to be part of a party, or you can declare not to be a part of a party. Most of our independents actually lean one way or the other. They're not necessarily true independents. But party identification is probably less significant today than what it used to be, right? Also in part because, as you see from this little graphic, it's gotten far more compact. There's less variation between Democrats and Republicans and independents than what there used to be. We talked about all of this already with beliefs and behaviors, right? With political socialization and who votes which way, and all of that wonderful stuff. So I'm actually going to jump through this because it should just be review. So you're welcome to go through that if you would like, but all of this should be review. Go ahead. All right. So again, this is just some statistical or some graphic data to let you know Republicans, Democrats, and independents. All right. The party system, this is what I was telling you earlier. I don't necessarily care about the history. We're going to go through this briefly. We're going to go through this briefly just because I care enough that I want you to know this. So the first party system emerges basically. Yep. Oh, he got one of them. Really? Yeah, there's blood on the board now. Dude, I don't know why the mosquitoes are so fierce this year.
Especially right now.
Dude, it's been ridiculous. Okay. So the first party system is the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists to become the Jeffersonian Republicans. This is part of the reason why I would tell you, I think our founders actually knew. Like, I really do. I think they understood that parties weren't evident and inevitability. I don't think that they realized how partisan we would become them. But I mean, like we wrote the Constitution in 1787. We got political parties in 1790. Like, it took 3 years. Like, it's not like it was going to happen. All right. But the first ones are the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists become Democratic Republicans, and then later they drop the Republican and they're just the Democrats, right? So I mean, our Democratic Party, like the actual Democratic Party in the United States, has been around basically since the beginning. The Republican Party doesn't emerge until much, much later. It's Andrew Jackson where we really drop the Republican aspect of it, and they just become the Democrats. Their opposition for a little while is the Whigs. Right. Then with the Civil War, you get Republicans. And so the Republicans become a political party. And then these are the two political parties we've had ever since then, although this is only the third of 6 party systems because there's been some shifts. And again, I don't care terribly about this, right? At least until we get to the 5th one. I do care about this one. I think we talked about already about FDR and how FDR was a significant sort of turning point in American political history. FDR ushers into, this is what we call the 5th party system, which is really just a Democratic dominance. Like, the Democrats control everything for roughly 50 years. And then the 6th party system, which is what we're in today, is really the era of divided government where we have Republicans controlling some things and Democrats controlling other things. So if you look right now, for instance, the Democrats control the House of Representatives, the Republicans control the Senate, the Republicans control the White House. You go back 4 years ago, the Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, and Obama was in the White House, so the Democrats had the White House. That's that era of divided government. So amongst those 3 elected entities, the House, the Senate, and the White House, you generally have 2 that are of one party and 1 that is of a different party. And so that's also what sort of results in our hyper-partisanship because they don't really want to work together. Realignment, I do need you to understand this conceptually, is basically when you have sort of drastic shifts in groups of the population supporting one party versus the other, right? So obviously, if you go back to like the 1870s, in the 1870s, all black people voted Republican because Lincoln was a Republican, and it was the Republicans that like ended slavery, and it was the Republicans that had sort of the occupation of the South going on so that black people were given their rights to vote. And then obviously we now know today that like all black people vote Democrat. So that's a realignment occurred at some point in time. And we can argue slightly about when those realignments occur. There's outliers to it as well. So I need you to understand, just because it happens one time doesn't make it a realignment, right? Blue collar workers in the Rust Belt, meaning Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, they voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Traditionally, blue collar workers have been Democratic for the last, well, almost forever. I'm not ready yet to say that that's a realignment. It might have just been an outlier because they really, really didn't like Hillary Clinton. All right, so we'll have to see what happens moving forward. I think, honestly, even if those states vote for Donald Trump again, I still wouldn't call it a realignment. They would need to support a different Republican candidate to really identify that as realignment versus something else, right? There's just your infographic of the party system over time. Party polarization is what we have today, which isn't great. This is the most polarized our Congress has possibly ever been. Probably not ever. We had really, really high polarization before and after the Civil War. But that's part of the reason why there are a number of smart, educated people today that believe that we are on the brink of a second civil war in the United States. And I will be 100% honest with you. I think that that's highly likely. It will be my hope that our civil war will be a cold civil war, but I don't know that would happen that way. But our partisanship today is on par with Civil War partisanship and just how divided our country was at that point in time. Third parties, we do need to talk about third parties a little bit. They do exist. They don't ever win elections. They're terrible, absolutely terrible. Well, when it comes to winning, I mean, third parties have a different ideal for things. Did I make y'all do the political spectrum test at the beginning of the year? No. I would tell you this. There's a website called isidewith.com. And if you're 18, you're going to vote in this election. I would advise you to go and answer the questions on that website. It will tell you who you align with and who you should ultimately vote for. Third parties, they don't win elections. If you vote for a third party, it's a wasted vote. And I say that with the little air quotes because full disclosure, I voted third parties before. I've wasted my vote before just out of principle. Because I hated both of the major party candidates that much, and because I personally don't like the idea of voting for the lesser of two evils. I mean, if your options are being shot in the head or being hung, I'm going to try to figure out a way to live. You know what I'm saying? And that's sort of how I look at some elections these days. One of the things that third parties do, however, that's wildly beneficial is that third parties can bring to light an issue that the public was sort of unaware of, or that the parties were ignoring. And then they siphon off enough votes that one of the two major parties loses an election that they think they shouldn't have lost. And then they will sort of engulf that. They'll swallow that ideal and make it a part of their platform in order to try to regain some support, right? This is the 2016 election. We actually had a couple of third-party candidates, Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. And I mean, they got a fair amount of the vote. I mean, Gary Johnson's goal, it's actually always been the goal of the Libertarian Party, is to get 5% of the popular vote, because if they got 5% of the popular vote, they would be eligible for federal subsidies of their next presidential campaign, which is almost $100 million. Like, Gary Johnson was so thrilled because he raised like $5 million in 2016, right? And the Libertarian Party could get 18 or 19 times that amount of money if the Libertarian Party could just get that 5% of the popular vote, and then they would be able to put themselves out there more. The Libertarian Party is ahead of the Green Party in that regard. Again, the Libertarian Party here in 2020, they've secured Joe Jurgensen's name on the ballot in all 50 states plus DC. I don't think Howie Hawkins has done that yet. Jill Stein did not. She did not get on the ballot in all 50 states plus DC. Right? I think this takes us to the end. These are just some various graphics about voter turnout and primaries and whatnot. Yeah. So that's it. Why is Bill Weld listed as the third-party candidate there? That's Bill Weld, but he was Johnson's vice presidential candidate. Whatever. All right, so awesome. I got through that. Yeah.